My question for our next guest, Haz Al-Din, will discuss this matter. So let's bring on Haz. He's the host of the Infrared webcast, which you can find on the streaming platform Kick. He's also an author, a commentator, and a political theorist. And he's a good friend of mine. Haz, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing well. So I don't know if you caught the last segment. I was briefly discussing the situation in Venezuela. I think a lot of people might not truly understand what's happening here. So could you give a brief summary about what this disputed territory called Guyana Essequibo is, why Venezuela just declared it the 24th state of their country, and why the U.S. wants to start a new war over that territory?
So when Simón Bolívar launched his war of independence against Spain in the early 19th century, Guyana Essequibo was part of the territory of Venezuela. When Venezuela, I don't know if it seceded, when it was no longer part of the Gran Colombia Confederation in 1830, this was part of its territory. The British, however, saw fit to decide the boundary of their own colony they got from the Dutch, called British Guyana. And they decided that territory was going to cut into what Venezuela had already claimed. So after 1841, Venezuela was contesting this, and it wouldn't be resolved, quote unquote, unfairly, I should add, until the end of the century, where basically a tribunal was convened by the United States, Britain, and Russia, which at the time was a British ally, which said that the territory, Guyana Essequibo, actually belongs to the British, to British Guyana. Fast forward half a century, and British Guyana is going to get independence from Britain. So they go back to the table and they decide at the Geneva Convention of 1966 that going forward, they were going to settle this matter bilaterally. And it was never settled. However, under international law, Guyana Essequibo and its waters were disputed territory. The issue did not raise its significance again until the late or the middle of the 2010s, where it was discovered that there was oil in the Guyana Essequibo region, which led ExxonMobil and others to flock to the region, more or less buy out the government of Guyana, and acquire these unprecedented rights to mine the oil there, basically ripping off the people of Guyana and drilling oil in disputed territory, which is a violation of international law. And they started drilling it. And over the past decade, Venezuela has tried everything they could to get Guyana to come to the table and settle this matter bilaterally, just them two. But Guyana, under pressure by ExxonMobil, has refused. It's insisted that they take the matter to the International Court of Justice, which is in violation of the Geneva Agreement, where they decided they were going to settle it bilaterally. So just recently, the limits of their patience being exhausted, especially with the news that Guyana was inviting the United States to build a military base there, undoubtedly to protect the assets of ExxonMobil, Venezuela decided they've had enough. So they held a referendum to reaffirm their stance on the matter of the dispute that Guyana Essequibo is part of Venezuelan territory. And I believe Maduro has given these oil companies 3 months to leave the premises, and that immediately Venezuelan companies, which, by the way, are by and large state-owned, therefore sovereign, can start drilling there. He's issued an order to give identity cards to the residents of Guyana Essequibo, making them Venezuelan citizens with the full rights, protections afforded by that. And undoubtedly, it's going to be portrayed, and is already being portrayed, as an act of unwarranted aggression. Just like in the case of Russia's SMO in Ukraine, that accusation is devoid of knowledge of the context.
Yeah. So basically, this was Venezuelan land. Then the British Empire used international football politics to steal the land. Then in 2015, they found that there's a lot of oil on this land. Then the U.S. Controlled government in Guyana decided that they were going to invite ExxonMobil and the U.S. military down to exploit the land. Venezuela the whole time has been engaged in diplomatic negotiations, and now they've recognized it as part of their territory because the Western states are trying to steal it from right underneath their feet. So I'm curious. I doubt anyone in the West is actually thinking about this with a rational mind, but maybe you could answer the question. Do you think that Western countries like the United States and the United Kingdom can afford to fight a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, a proxy genocide against the people of Gaza through Israel, prepare for a new war with China and Taiwan, and also fight a war against Venezuela and Guyana all at the same time?
The short answer is no. While the United States and its allies are very capable of destruction, when you have a popular government, especially in the case of Venezuela, where there's a militia, I believe, 2 million strong, ready to throw down for their government, you can't hold the territory. You can bomb it, you can kill a lot of people, you can destroy the infrastructure, you can level it. Undoubtedly, they can do that. But you can't hold it and you can't occupy it. So the question comes down to whether or not we, the American people, are going to allow our government to commit these pointless and ultimately vain acts of destruction and mass murder, which isn't going to even succeed in the goal it sets about to fulfill and justifies itself on the basis of. Sure, we caused immense destruction to Iraq, but did we fulfill our stated goals of bringing a pro-U.S. regime there? We didn't. Iraq is far more friendlier to Iran than it ever has been. And Iran is undoubtedly far more popular in the region with the actual forces which stand against U.S. imperial interests than Saddam's government was. So all we would be doing is causing murder, mayhem, and destruction, and nothing else. And we are very capable of doing that. We shouldn't underestimate our capacity to do that. But in terms of being able to stop the multipolar world, it's impossible. And it's about time we, the American people, remind our politicians and inform our politicians that their cause is in vain.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, there's no argument that could, convince me or I think any average American that somehow sending U.S. troops to Guyana, a country that most people in the United States probably don't even know exists, to fight a war for oil. I mean, it's just, you can't convince anyone that that's in our best interest. And shifting gears here to the situation in Israel and in Gaza, you've brought up a really good point in debates with Zionists that I've watched with you, and that, hey, look, the Arab world did not pose a threat to the West. It did not pose a threat to the United States before 1948, the establishment of the Israeli state. So why is it that we continue to prop up the state of Israel? Why is it we continue to prop up their military and their genocide? And why don't we actually seek to have peace with all these Arab states? Do you think that peace is attainable at some point in our lifetime with these Arab Gulf states?
I think that peace with the Arab Gulf states has already been achieved as far as the United States is concerned. And the real concern by these Gulf states is actually the people. It's not the government. The government would be fully in bed with Israel publicly, not just the UAE, but Saudi Arabia and others, were it not for the popular pressure in the region. They know it would regionally delegitimize them. But as far as the question of why we continue to prop up the Zionist entity in the region, the answer is a combination of the Zionist lobby and the entrenched interests of the international oil banksters in the region to suppress the growth of regional forms of sovereign power. Israel obstructs and sets a precedent within the region of division, of creating ethno-states, of conflict, preventing the natural regional integration that we have seen in the history of that region for many millennia. So it's the same, more or less, reason we decide to support Taiwan separatism. We decide to senselessly back the Ukrainians against the Russians. And even, to another limited extent, why we are interested in now intervening in Guyana. These small proxy states serve to obstruct the growth of sovereign regional powers that won't be dependent on the World Bank and the international oligarchical bankster class in order to acquire parasitic loans that will inevitably forestall and impede their development. And when these regions are capable of development, as China has, they pose a fierce competition to the financial monopoly capital that rules the governments of the West. So it's a monopoly enforcing its interests at the expense of not only the people of that region, but even us at home.
Yeah, I guess when I said, can we have peace with the Arab Gulf states, I guess I meant a peace like Putin is currently enjoying. He's in the UAE today, he's in Saudi Arabia as well, doing big bro handshakes with Mohammed bin Salman. And in the UAE, he received a grand ceremony, the likes of which I've never seen for any world leader. I mean, it was incredible. They had fighter jet pilots doing the Russian flag in the sky. It was like something I've never seen before. It seems like a lot of these Arab Gulf states, yeah, we have peace with them, but we don't have a true relationship with them based on a mutual understanding and trust. It's not that, it's that we bought out their governments. I guess the question is, for how long can that last? And the bigger picture, I think, is how long can the Israeli state last in its current context if countries like Russia and China and this new multipolar world don't support it?
No, you're exactly right. And at the same time that the Gulf states are friendliest to us in the region, besides Israel, we have the State Department wing of U.S. imperialism trying to meddle in their domestic affairs, promoting pro-democracy NGOs and so on and so forth. So even in terms of then, we can't keep a competent relationship. It's pure incompetency of an empire, if you ask me. But as far as the broader question of how long Israel is sustainable, if you ask me, there's two possibilities of the current genocide in Gaza. Either within the next month or two, there is a permanent ceasefire, which would be a Hamas victory, or it will inevitably escalate into a regional war. And I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the Zionist entity will not survive that regional war. Sure, we will probably get involved and commit a great deal of troops and military assets and cause havoc and destruction, but in the long term, who rules a region is who is native to the region, who understands the people of that region. And we don't, and neither does the Zionist entity. In the long game, they won't be able to make it out of a regional war that's protracted and is waged by masterminds of guerrilla warfare like the IRGC.
Yeah, I was just talking with Max Blumenthal. It seems as though the Israeli military is suffering pretty high losses and casualties in this invasion, and they're not getting what they expected, I guess. I don't know what they expected going into this, sniper and drone heaven that they've created in Gaza, with all the rubble and destroyed buildings everywhere. It's quite the scene. It's horrific, but they're suffering pretty high casualties. And it almost seems like to me that at this point, with even some of the withdrawal of these Israeli troops from the north of Gaza because of the dense level of Hamas airstrikes on their positions, it almost seems like that some of these other regional groups that you might refer to that might get involved in a regional war, that the Palestinian resistance doesn't really need them right now. It almost seems like they're doing a decent job of defending their military assets in Gaza. Of course, there's the horrific bombings, but at this point, I mean, do you think that this could actually result in a regional war? And what do you think would be the red line that would need to be crossed that would bring us to that point?
I think the red line would be if Hamas finds themselves cornered and on the brink of destruction, their allies will definitely come to their aid. I don't believe the axis of resistance is going to allow Gaza to fall. They don't want to get involved just yet because, as you mentioned, they do believe in the ability for Hamas to wage a long, protracted war. But if the ground invasion does not acquire full fruition, if they constantly just bomb, and level Gaza and massacre its civilians, regional actors will be pushed to their limit. And I don't think this is going to be able to last. I mean, as others have pointed out, the amount of children being killed per day in Gaza is even more than those that were killed during the Holocaust. It is simply unacceptable and untenable. And I would be very surprised if the people in the region, let alone the governments, would be able to tolerate that for another few months. Either Israel commits to a full ground invasion in which they're faced with guerrilla war and a long, protracted conflict, or they have to settle for a ceasefire, because the alternative is the destruction of the Zionist entity itself.
Yeah, I agree that the regional actors have been staying out of heavy business, heavy fighting. There's been some missiles fired, but they've been staying out of the meat and potatoes of it for those reasons. But there's one, semi-regional actor, I guess, a little bit further away, who has been working overtime, and that's Yemen. Yemen's been, taking over, and in some cases, even attacking, reportedly, some of these Israeli-owned ships that are making very short sea routes to get to their, destinations, and even launching some drones above U.S. warships in the region. What do you make of these Yemeni takeovers of these trade and shipping ships? What do you make of this, and what's the impact going to be on the Israeli financial sector and their shipping industry as they have to deal with these Yemeni attacks?
I think Yemen is one of the rare cases we see in history where a people are rising up and defying the world's greatest power purely on the basis of defending the honor of their people, and they consider the Palestinians their people because they're fellow Arabs and they're fellow Muslims, and they also have nothing to lose. The humble and brave people of Yemen fought for years against the Saudi invasion, which was undoubtedly very destructive and took a great toll on them. And it has made them fearless, and it has hardened them to the point where the United States can try to invade Yemen. They could try to bomb Yemen as much as they want. Same with the Zionist entity. What can they do that the Saudis haven't? And the humble people of Yemen feel they have nothing to lose. I mean, really, when you think about it, what do they have to lose? And it's quite a shame, because Yemen is defending the honor of the entire Muslim and Arab world. And they have the least amount of money. They have the least amount of military assets and strength. But they're proving themselves, I believe, to be leaders in the region. As for the long-term consequences, obviously the United States is not going to tolerate it. One of the biggest roles of the United States around the world is the facilitation of trade on the sea, even when it doesn't concern them. So if these vessels are being blocked, we're looking at a situation, and the British used to fulfill this role of the Suez Canal being blocked by Nasser. And undoubtedly, that's not going to be able to last very long. But at the same time, why has the U.S. not acted as severely as it otherwise would? Because its hands are tied. Its hands are tied, sending its most important naval assets to protect the Zionist entity in the Mediterranean. Now it has to deal with the prospect of something going on in South America. It's a disastrous situation for the unipolar world.
Yeah, it really is. And when you talk about the end of the unipolar world and this era of multipolarism that we're living through, you can read people like the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. He talks about the varying movements that are taking place all across the world, whether it's Pan-Africanism, whether it's, this anti-imperialism in Latin America, whether it's the anti-EU sentiments in Europe, or whether it's the project of the Communist Party of China in Asia. When you look at the United States, you're a U.S. citizen, you're an American patriot, you are an American communist, and you're also soon going to be releasing a new book. What are the, I guess, goals that you would share with the American people about how we can properly integrate our country, and for that matter, other Western countries like the UK? We've got a big UK audience listening right now. What should be the goals of, Western citizens and how we take our countries back? What would be the main things?
America's power needs to stem from its own internal strength. It needs to stem from the strength of its people and its own very abundant resources, which we're not even fully tapping into. Presently, the policy of our regime is to prop up an empire that is based on the exploitation, plundering, theft, and overthrow of foreign governments and countries, endangering Americans who have no interest in going to war and meddling in the affairs of others. As Americans, we need to take our country back in order to realize our own inner potential as a people. We need to focus on our own issues. We need to attend to our own affairs, and that begins really, in my view, with getting to the heart of the matter. We need to nationalize and take sovereign control of these resources that are owned by an international bankster cartel: our energy, our natural resources, our farmland. And most importantly, we need to dismantle the Federal Reserve and have our own sovereign financial system. Once we can have these things, the source of power of the international bankster cartel, which drives us to war and intervention and causes chaos and destruction around the entire world, will be depleted. But where does that begin? That begins with Americans realizing that we are currently divided by things that shouldn't divide us. We're divided by ideologies that were given to us by the very same people we think we're fighting against. Americans need to come together as one American working class, putting away all of this identity politics nonsense and other distractions, and realize the main conflict in this country is between the people, the working class, and a ruling class, which is neither loyal to the people of this country nor the country itself.
Well, if there's one person who's doing more to frighten and piss off the international oligarchical elite, Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, Clinton Global Initiative, whatever it might be, it's Haz Al-Din. So everyone be sure to follow Haz on Twitter at InfraHaz, and check out his YouTube and his Kick stream, which you can find by searching Infrared Haz online. So Haz, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's a pleasure, and hopefully you'll come back and join with George sometime. I think that'd be a special conversation with you two.